Welcome, those of you who have straggled in. Thank you for suffering through all the traffic on Mopac, or on Mopark is what Grant calls it. I do appreciate that. I know sometimes it's tough to get here at this time, so I appreciate you guys coming out. We've got a really exciting meeting tonight. I hope you've had some opportunity to do a little bit of networking. We just finished with our introduction into real estate investing. And I'll tell you a little bit about Austin RENC. I'll bring up some sponsors. We'll do about a 5-minute market update so I can tell you what's going on in the MLS in Austin so you know where you stand. And especially that will be very helpful as you make offers and do your marketing. We'll have a keynote presentation tonight, and we actually have 2 keynote presenters tonight, and someone who's shining a green light my way. He's the guy in the green shirt. Everybody can turn around and take a look at him and ask him not to do that again. And so we've got two really fantastic presenters tonight. We've got Phil Treach, who's been a very long time supporter of Austin RENC and probably a member for about the last 8 or 9 years. And then we also have Alan Ceshker. He's a local attorney that closes all of our real estate transactions, really understands all of the creative stuff that we want to do, and knows how to draw the paperwork accordingly. So, and at the end of the night, we'll have some deal pitching, and we'll let you network. We try and end the meeting at 9 p.m. Sometimes the networking lasts until 10 p.m. We've got some really sweet people here at the Norris Conference Center, so when they ask you to leave, you can just take it to wherever else you need to take it to, but you are free to network here and stay here until the Norris Conference Center kicks you out, which is typically sometime between 10 and 10:30. This is a really great group of people. Many of you I know personally, and many of you I've known for years and years and years, and you keep coming back, I hope and I think, because you know it's a good place to be and a great place to network, find deals, find opportunities, and meet other partners. So that is our schedule for tonight. I'll go ahead and announce our next speaker. We are very lucky and blessed to have Alan Ceshker as part of our group, and I beg him to come and speak here all the time. He's also very gracious with his time, especially with the real estate investors that we have here. He's on the board, he's on our Yahoo discussion group, and a lot of times legal questions will be presented on the board, and Alan is gracious enough to answer those for all of you and for all of your information. And he's actually taken the time to go through some of the new legislation that affects what we do as real estate investors from a lending standpoint and from a seller's financing standpoint. And this has been a very hot topic for us over the last 4 months. And I'd like you guys just to give Alan a very big warm round of applause and let him know how much we appreciate him being part of this group and coming to present this for us. So thank you so much, Alan. Here you go.
How's this? Everyone hear me? All right, wanted to say thank you to Shanoa and also Phil, specifically for this. If it wasn't for some of their transactions, I wouldn't have spent hundreds of hours researching this and trying to figure out what the heck's going on. So I appreciate that. As Shanoa said, my name's Alan Ceshker. I'm an attorney here in Austin. I've been practicing law for too long. Have a title office, close real estate transactions under Allegiance title, and have kind of made a bit of a niche with creative financing and assisting folks with those types of things. So I have to have a disclaimer because I'm an attorney. I'll sum that up. This stuff is complex. If you have a transaction that you think is involving it, you're going to need to speak with an attorney. I say right there on the second bullet, consult an attorney for free, and I'll explain that in a second, what that means. This is the phone call I get. What the heck's going on in regard to Dodd-Frank? So who's heard that Dodd-Frank affects seller finance transactions? And do we all know that mortgage wrap transactions are seller finance transactions, right? Even if it's an exact assumption of the underlying mortgage, it's still going to be considered seller finance and be governed potentially by Dodd-Frank. Title 14 of the Dodd-Frank Act is what we're dealing with. It's the one that deals with the regulations on lending. What it does is it requires lenders to confirm an ability to repay. I mean, the borrower is going to be able to pay that mortgage, and then also regulate some of the terms and conditions of what you can and can't do in regard to a seller finance note. There's exceptions. Let's talk about those first. This does not involve commercial transactions. If it's commercial, then you're exempt. Residential is what we're talking about, but don't get it confused with homestead. It is residential property. Entity selling to entity, and you see there's an asterisk there. What a lot of folks are saying is that the Consumer Protection Act, this is protecting consumers, and a consumer is an individual or a trust controlled by an individual that's borrowing money. Folks are saying that an entity-to-entity transaction is exempt. That brings up a lot of really neat topics and information. It's not proven yet, and if you want to be a vanguard, you want to go out there and be the one that's a test case for this, then come talk with me. We'll get entity set up, and your buyer will have an entity, and we'll do the loan, and then we'll go see if we're right or wrong. One-time seller finance. So if I want to go and sell my house via mortgage wrap, or for that matter, seller finance, and I'm not an investor, and I'm not doing this more than one time in any rolling 12-month period, then I'm 100% exempt. I don't have to do anything in regard to Dodd-Frank. So you get a one swing. Real quick, everyone talks about being exempt if you're doing 3 or less in a rolling 12-month period. I don't agree with that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think once you're doing 2, you're under Dodd-Frank, and you need to start handling things in a certain manner, which I'm going to discuss. Properties greater than 4 units, investor purchase. So did I put an asterisk by this? Pretend like there's an asterisk there. I want to make sure we're all squared away. If you're purchasing a property via seller finance, if via mortgage wrap, seller finance, what have you, then you don't care if everyone's complying with Dodd-Frank. It's protecting the consumer. You are the consumer. So you don't have to worry about that seller complying with Dodd-Frank, especially if they're a one-time seller. So you're double exempt. So confirming ability to repay, you don't care if that seller is confirming your ability to repay. So that's why I call it an exception. It's not an actual exception under the Act, but I have people coming in to me sometimes saying, hey, I'm purchasing this property via seller finance. I want to make sure we're complying with Dodd-Frank. And I tell them, no, you don't. Matter of fact, you don't want to comply with Dodd-Frank. So if something goes wrong, they do something wrong, you have all the defenses of that. So remember that when you're doing these. There's a qualified mortgage standard. There's 4 qualified mortgage standards according to the Dodd-Frank Act, and then according to the Bureau, there's a couple more that they're throwing in there. There's one that's going to be real important for us type of folks, and it's the small creditor balloon payment qualified mortgage. And what that means is if you have less than $2 billion in assets and you do less than 500 transactions a year, you can qualify under this. If you have more than $2 billion in assets and you're doing more than 500 transactions per year, just come see me. I'll get you Dodd-Frank compliant, whatever it costs, because that's a different world. If you do qualify under this, it means you have a safe harbor. And what that means is you've established that you've complied with ATR. It's not a conclusive safe harbor, but it is a presumptive safe harbor, meaning that the borrower can bring evidence that you didn't comply, but it starts with an assumption that you've complied. You have to also comply with some of those terms there: equal monthly payments. Loan term has to be a 5-year minimum. Can't transfer the loan within first 3 years. You got to keep your documentation. You're going to use your mortgage loan originator, which we're going to talk about, and then the ATR review is required. That's ability to repay. Let's talk about what that means, and it's kind of the crux of what we're dealing with, and it's also nebulous a bit. The Act says certain things. They're going to look at the income. It doesn't say exactly what you're going to be looking at, but you're going to have to confirm employment and income. It doesn't tell you how to confirm employment. It doesn't say if it has to be documented or if you can just make a phone call. And I'm going to point out some of the weaknesses of what Dodd-Frank does and tells us to do. You're going to look at the mortgage payment for this loan plus the payments of any simultaneous loans in regard to this transaction, not other loans. You're going to look at the other costs related to the property, taxes, HOA, et cetera. This is all what we're going to be looking at in terms of debt. Then you look at the other debt obligations, alimony, child support. Then you take into consideration the debt-to-income ratio. And here's what's neat. On all except one of the qualified mortgage standards, they don't tell you what that debt-to-income ratio is supposed to be. There's a number of 43 thrown out there, but under this standard, it doesn't need to be 43. As to what it needs to be, we don't know, and that's why we're going to suggest a way to handle these. It says look at credit history. Again, doesn't say what any credit score should be. It just says you're supposed to look at it. So compliance is difficult. What I call an actual safe haven, if you wanted to be 100% compliant here, you're going to meet what's called the general QM standards, and that's going to be the standards that's pretty much the same as any conventional mortgage, FHA, et cetera. You're going to use a loan originator, a licensed loan originator. The second you do 2 loans or more, you need to send this over to a loan originator. Some of y'all may know Danny Weber. I've referred him as the RMLO to take care of these. One of the reasons is because he and I are working on trying to decipher this act. Keep your 43% DTI, debt-to-income ratio, and then there's your interest rate that you're allowed to do and still comply with the general standards. The average prime offer rate, that's published weekly. So if you're 1.5% above that, that's the max. Let's talk about the liability if you don't comply. That's the problem here. The borrower can sue for all the financial charges that were paid. They can recover a set-off if you're trying to foreclose on the property. And most importantly, they can beat foreclosure. There's going to be a lot of loss mitigation efforts that you're required to do. If someone comes to me and there's not sufficient evidence that there was ability to repay analysis, I'm going to be able to stop a foreclosure really for as long as I want. So the liabilities are big. The practical issues are when you go to recovery property in a default situation, when you try to foreclose, they're going to start hollering that you didn't comply with the ability to repay, didn't comply with Dodd-Frank. And they're going to be able to stop you, especially if they lawyer up with someone who knows what the heck's going on here. The foreclosure process is now modified. There's a 120-day wait period where the lender is supposed to conduct loan modification, loss mitigation efforts, and that needs to occur during that 120-day period. And then you start the 20-day notice, the 21-day notice, and you get to foreclosure. That means that you're not going to foreclose anymore. And on the transactions that I close, the mortgage wrap transactions I close, I stay involved in those transactions forever. So if there's a problem, I want them to call me, and we're going to fix the problem. And we're going to fix the problem by telling the borrower, that they need to get out. And so you got 2 choices. Sheriff can come over and kick you and your babies out in the street without notice to you, or you can work with these folks and get out of the house voluntarily under a cash for keys or something of that nature, and you be in control of when that occurs. Now, I didn't fib there, but I did kind of make it sound like this thing could happen in the next 3 days. So I'm fine if we do that. They need to either pay or get out in my moral world. So I'm fine not advising them as to their full time period they need to get out. And then I'm going to speak with the lender, and I'm going to tell them, you need to let them pay half payment per month, take 2 months, give them 60 days to get out, and consider yourself lucky because you just saved 130 some odd days. So that's how you end a transaction like this. You don't foreclose. So if you have someone who's being a bit obstinate, or if they're no longer present, you don't have to comply with 120 days because they're not going to be there fighting you. I have some folks who have gone off to Mexico and they don't care about the house anymore. You send notice to the house, it comes back uncollected, that's fine. You've complied with the statute. You're going to meet the requirements of the title company. All you have to do is show that you sent that notice, show your green card, so you won't have to follow the 120 days if they're still not around to work with you. So if you get into a situation like that, give me a holler. By the way, real quick, we're not going to have as much time for questions and answers today. My business cards are back here at this table. Misha, can you stand up? She's the one, just grab a business card from her if you want while we're talking, and shoot me an email. I like answering these questions. If you ask me a question I don't know, it allows me to grow and learn. I call the bureau all the time and ask them questions. They like me. So let's ask some questions if y'all have them. If not, we'll talk about some of the other practical aspects. Any questions? It's an 847-page document that references 3,000 other pages, and no one has any questions about this stuff? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, one-time seller, and you're in the middle with end-user buyer, then you don't have to worry about Dodd-Frank anymore. Now, if that seller somehow doesn't qualify as a one-time seller, then they need to make sure that they're in compliance. And you can't necessarily say, even though it's an assignment and you're receiving an assignment fee, you can't really say, I don't care, because if it blows up, they're going to come back after a few people, you being one and me being the other, since I closed it. So, yeah, that's a very good point. Yes? So say it again, individual. I'm going to say that's what they're saying, and that's why I had an asterisk there. I don't like it. I don't like it as a tool. In theory, you could say, all right, Mr. Buyer, in order to complete this transaction, you need to be an entity, so we're going to pay $350, get you an entity online. The RMLO ability to repay is going to cost you $500, so instead of spending the $500 application over there to the loan officer, just spend $350. Now you're an entity. Now go buy this property. Well, I'm not 100% certain that's going to work. No one's 100% certain it's going to work until a judge says. B, your house is now held in an entity, so it's not protected from liability. If this buyer has debts and has a judgment against them from a credit card for $500, well, this person can now go get that house because it's not going to be homesteaded under the laws. TCAD does say that holding your house in an entity, you can still have homestead under the tax, but that's only been a verbal, and I haven't confirmed or denied that. So there's some problems with it. I don't like it personally. Yes, ma'am.
For the one-off seller that's only selling one time, so they're exempt, do you think that they're also exempt from the 120-day waiting period for the foreclosure, or are they still subject to that?
They're exempt from that. If you're 3 or less in a 12-month period, you're not exempt from that portion, and you have the other items. You can't be the builder of the house. You have to confirm ability to repay, can't balloon, those types of things. But the one-time seller, it does indicate that they're exempt from the 120-day requirement. Yes, sir. Every rolling 12-month period. Yes. So a lot of folks are kind of just ignoring this, and I'm not certain that that's really a dangerous route. That sounds kind of silly for a lawyer to be saying, I just ignore this small little federal statute. But the key is, when it comes into play, it's when you're trying to redeem that property, when you're trying to foreclose, and y'all are not going to foreclose on the properties. That's going to be a last-ditch DEFCON 1 situation. I've had a couple hundred mortgage wraps over the decade. I've had probably 10 go in default. 7 of those we did cash for keys. 2 were being a little bit reluctant, but finally gave us the place back, and we had to foreclose on 1. And that's the way that everyone needs to think. is we're going to avoid foreclosure, and that's going to keep me safe in this. All right. I appreciate it. Grab a business card, write down my email address. Again, I'm fine y'all asking questions via email on this stuff because it allows me to learn. Thank y'all.